So we're going to hear next from just some professionals about what this counseling effort is all about. Let me introduce Robert Vazzo, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional clinical counselor in California, with additional licenses in marriage and family therapy in Nevada, Florida, and Ohio. And gentlemen, you can come up while I'm talking. That would be great. He's a strong advocate of client rights and accuracy in research, and the topic he's going to speak about is junk science versus valid research. And the second person is David Pickup. David is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a reparative therapist, and a national lobbyist for client therapeutic rights. And he operates a private practice in Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. And I don't know where they are. So are you guys here? Okay, yeah, come on up, please. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Yes, have a seat. All right, so here's the plan. Just to remind you, you should have some cards in your lap somewhere. If you don't, find some, or maybe some can pass them out, and make sure as you're listening to them that you write your questions, and then they'll be collected, and we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. All right, so Robert Vazzo. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Sandy. Computer time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. You know, we're here today to talk about truth. But I want to start with a little story. The other day I got a phone call from a potential client, and so I scheduled his first session. And I said to him what I say to every client: what brings you here today? What's bothering you? So he began to talk, and he talked for the first 10 minutes about his family and his friends and his interests. And then he still kept talking about his job, his employer, and the things he liked. And so after about 20 minutes, I said, John, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't know what's brought you here today. Why don't you start from the beginning? He said, the beginning? I said, yes. The very beginning? Yes, the beginning. Well, in the beginning, I created the heavens and the earth. And then, did you get the joke? Then I knew what the problem was. Okay? Now, you and I both know, we all know, that that's not the truth. Okay? Today, we're here today to discuss the truth. And ladies and gentlemen, I have some bad news. You're not getting the truth. Okay? You're not getting the truth about... The American public is not being told the truth about the predictors of homosexuality and the role of genetics. We're not being told the truth about mental health issues associated with homosexuality. We're not being told the truth about the fluidity of sexual orientation. And we're not being told the truth about the safety of change therapies. So during our presentation, I'm going to cover the first three issues, and my excellent colleague David is going to take the last one, and then we'll have a Q&A. Okay? First, we're going to start with the predictors of homosexuality and the role of genetics. Okay. What are some important predictors of homosexuality? The first one is gender identity disorder or dysphoria in childhood. Now, let me explain this. When I was in graduate school at the University of Southern California, we were given a book, and the book is called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and in it was gender identity disorder. And what that means is that with children, you could have a boy who says he wants to be a girl, he feels like a girl, he likes things that girls like, and the same thing with a girl, okay? That disorder didn't please many activists, because once you call something a disorder, then you say it needs to be treated. And so the new book that came out was the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And many gay rights advocates said, take it out, because it's not a problem. Okay? But when you take it out of the book, then you can't treat it. And if you can't treat it, you can't get reimbursed for it. So they changed the name to dysphoria. And a dysphoria is a condition in which a person doesn't feel good about the situation. So what that means currently is if you have a son or daughter who wants to be the opposite sex, opposite gender, but they're not disturbed about it, it's not a problem. Okay? That's where we are right now. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders reports that in adolescence and adulthood, about 3/4 of boys who had a childhood history of gender identity disorder report a homosexual or bisexual orientation. Okay? What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you have a child with this condition, 75% of those children become homosexual or bisexual later. It is a predictor. It's a fact. Okay? Not an opinion. It's a fact. Okay, a Finnish study in 2009, and I actually personally reviewed this study and wrote a report for the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, that's NARTH. I reviewed this study myself. It found that as a group, homosexual participants reported more gender atypical behavior in childhood than the heterosexual participants. Okay? The American Psychological Association and gay rights activists want the public to believe that gender atypical behavior cannot be predicted and occurs naturally. Some boys like playing with trucks, others like playing with dolls. It just happens. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing could be further from the truth. Our work with children and families suggests otherwise. Also, common knowledge suggests otherwise. We as people like people who are similar to us, right? That's why we have racism. That's why we have sexism. That's why in employment situations we have the old boys network. We like people who are similar to us. We tend to identify with people similar to us. In childhood, if we have a warmly supportive environment with the same-sex parent, we will identify with them, okay? If we don't, if it's a traumatic environment, a hostile environment, we will be afraid to, and we will identify with the opposite gender, especially if the female in our lives is very strong, okay? So it does not just occur. There are predictors to also gender atypical behavior. Okay, I'm moving on to the next predictor of homosexuality, childhood sexual abuse. Using a sample of 33,771 individuals, researchers from Harvard and Columbia University, this is in 2013, recently published, have found what many other researchers have found. Sexual abuse in childhood predicts in a linear fashion same-sex attraction, partners, and identity. And Peter mentioned this previously. Those are the three elements of what we call sexual orientation. Now, you might ask, why do you have that underlined in a linear fashion? Let me explain. Many of you have probably heard that, for example, if a young man has a poor relationship with his father, he could develop a same-sex orientation, a homosexual orientation or a bisexual orientation. What gay rights activists say is, oh, no, you have it all wrong. It goes the other direction, that when a boy is homosexual or bisexual, he has a poor relationship with his father because his father doesn't like him anymore. So that it works in the opposite direction. Or when you have mistreatment in childhood, it's because he's gay. He's been gay to begin with. So what these researchers did is they constructed the research design, and it's very technical, and I won't bore you with the details, but they constructed the research design so that it works only in one direction. Okay? They also cite 4 other studies that have come to the same conclusion and note that the effects of sexual abuse on men's sexual orientation were substantially larger than on women's. So, again, childhood sexual abuse is a predictor of later bisexuality or homosexuality. Some other factors that are predictors of homosexuality, these are specific to individuals and their postnatal environment. And I'm going to stop there for a moment. Notice I said postnatal environment, not natal environment. Many of you have heard about these studies in which they believe that if a woman is under stress during her pregnancy, and I don't know any women who aren't, but if she's under stress during her pregnancy, her body will release hormones. The hormones will masculinize a female child and will feminize a male child. Now, where do they get this theory? They get it from studying rats. They found that if you stress a female rat, she, or the female rat, will give off offspring that behave in ways that the opposite sex would behave. Okay. I've never seen how rats behave, but that's what they say. So they did these studies, and they asked women to report how they felt 20 years prior, and then they collected these statistics, and in some of the studies, they found no differences between the mothers of bisexual or homosexual sons. In other studies, it was significant only in the second month of pregnancy. They tried to replicate the studies, and some of the studies didn't come out the same. So I've read many of these, and they're not good studies. Often the sample size is small. In one study I read, the women whom they asked to fill out the surveys belonged to PFLAG. Okay? And as you know, PFLAG is a pro-gay organization. They also told them what the research hypothesis was. Now, if you were doing a study about whether Christians pray more than, let's say, Muslims, and you were asked to fill out a questionnaire, and you were told what the research hypothesis was, how do you think you would fill out that questionnaire? Pretty positively for Christians, right? So I'm not impressed with those studies. Okay, so back to the third factor. Factors specific to individuals and their environment can have a large effect on same-sex sexuality. A, relational difficulties with same-sex parents predicts homosexuality. Relational difficulties with same-sex peers, bullying. Okay? And repeated same-sex sexual relations, this is called habituation or conditioning. When you do something once and it gives you pleasure, you remember it. That's habituation or conditioning. Okay, the genetic switch hypothesis has little empirical support in science. What a lot of people would like you to believe is that at the age of 13 or 14, a switch goes off and the person becomes attracted to the same sex. This is nonsense, okay? Genes don't work that way. The authors of the previously mentioned sexual abuse study note that for schizophrenia, genetic determinants alone can explain no more than 3% of the phenomena. Meaning when we have something like schizophrenia, homosexuality, we say, how can this be explained? What are the variables? No more than 3% can be explained by genes for schizophrenia. Okay? So for homosexuality, it can't be any more than that. The authors of the study, they published the study, and then, of course, there's always other people who complain about the study, and they publish their complaints in letters to the scholarly journal. And one of the complaints was that you have not considered genetics enough. So the study authors said, what do you mean we haven't considered genetics enough? What gene? And the complainers said, well, we really don't know if there's a single gene. We think it's many genes, each gene contributing a little to the phenomena. So then the study authors said, what are these genes? They couldn't come up with an answer. And then it died there. Okay? So right now, there is no strong evidence of anything more than some influence of genes. More importantly, genes determine fixed traits like eye color or height, not desires or behaviors which are developed over time. Those are learned. Okay. What are some of the mental health issues associated with homosexuality? Pornography and sexual addiction. Sexual abuse and other forms of mistreatment can have prolonged and continual effects on emotional states and behaviors. The previously mentioned study notes that an individual who does not have a solid sense of gender identity may choose same-sex behaviors, looking at pornography and finding partners, to feel better about the self. This supports leading reorientation therapist Dr. Joseph Nicolosi's assertion that homosexuality is an affect regulator for the self. Now, let me explain affect regulator. You and I both know that sometimes when we're not feeling so well, a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream will do the trick. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an affect regulator. If a man doesn't feel good about himself because of how he was treated by his father or his peers, and he's having a lot of stress in his life, and he doesn't feel masculine enough, he feels inferior, he may go out and seek another male and have a sexual liaison to feel better. He may go online and look at pornography to feel better. That's an affect regulator. Okay? And this study, the authors mentioned that. And Dr. Joseph Nicolosi was my supervisor in my internship, and that is one of his hypotheses. Okay, another mental health issue associated with homosexuality, very closely associated, is borderline personality disorder. And I want to explain personality disorders. These are mental conditions which develop over time. Okay? It takes a lot of time to develop a personality disorder. They don't happen because of stress on the job. They start in infancy and childhood. Okay. Numerous researchers and mental health professionals have documented the link between borderline personality disorder and homosexuality. I've given you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. Okay? There are many more. Many gay and lesbian activists will say the reason there's the personality disorder is because society doesn't accept homosexuality. I say no, you can't use that argument, because a personality disorder begins in infancy and childhood. The first 5 years of life, as you know, are the most important, okay? So that argument doesn't work, and that's why I've included this. We believe that homosexuality is an attempt to repair unmet attachment needs with the same sex. And borderline personality disorder is an attachment disorder. A researcher from the United Kingdom examined the rates of mental illness among a sample size of 7,403 adults, that's a good sample size, and found higher rates of depression, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, phobia, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and alcohol and drug dependence among the homosexual population as compared to the heterosexual population. So that is very significant. Gay rights activists, my gay colleagues say, Robert, that's because society doesn't accept homosexuality. And I say, look, you can convince me that some of the depression, some of the anxiety, some of this is due to that, but not all of it. I don't believe it. I'm now going to transition to the fluidity of sexual orientation. For many men and women, sexual orientation is fluid. Sexual orientation can be measured on a scale from 0 to 13, where 0 is exclusively heterosexual and 13 is exclusively homosexual. This is called the Epstein scale of sexual orientation. It is a real scale. We use it in place of the Kinsey scale because, as some of you may know, Kinsey used biased samples. Okay? In my judgment, he was not honest with his research, and once a researcher is found to be dishonest, I throw it out. I do not use the Kinsey scale. The Epstein scale also measures a sexual orientation range. What that means is that each of us we can not only plot our sexual orientation as a point, but as a range, because throughout our lifespans that can change. Change simply moving from one point to another on the scale. And there you have the website if you're interested in seeing that. We would like to believe that there are only 3 distinct categories: heterosexual, bisexual, and homosexual. But current research suggests otherwise. There's everything in between. And David and I both have practices, and we have found that too to be true. Okay. The SAMHSA report entitled Ending Conversion Therapy in Supporting and Affirming LGBTQ Youth admits that adolescence itself is a time of questioning about sexual orientation, and many adolescents who once claimed a homosexual orientation later determined that they were not gay. In a nationwide study by Ott, Corliss, Whippage, Rosario, and Austin that was done in 2010, 12% of teen males and a whopping 22% of females once claimed a homosexual or bisexual orientation. They now say that they're heterosexual. That shows you that it's fluid. Now, I want to make a comment about this report, that SMSHA is a United States government organization. It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And they came out with a report, and they made some statements that I found very disturbing about sexual orientation and gender identity. And I want to take a moment and read it to you to see what your reaction is. Scientists now recognize that a wide spectrum of gender identities and gender expressions exist and have always existed, including people who identify as either a man or a woman, neither a man or a woman, a blend of a man or a woman, or a unique gender identity. Ladies and gentlemen, as I look out of the audience, I just see males and females. I don't know what they're talking about. A she-boy? A she-man? Could you imagine going to the hospital, one of your friends is pregnant, and you ask her, did you have a boy or a girl? Well, neither. Unbelievable. Okay, so that disturbs us as practitioners, that a U.S. government agency would come out with such a statement. It is not the truth. Of course, there are people who do not feel male or female, but that doesn't mean that anything has changed, right? XY chromosomes, you're male, XX female, okay? There's nothing more to discuss. If you don't feel that way, then we'll talk about it, but that's a fact. Okay, therapists who practice change therapies do not claim to be able to move a person from 13 to 0 on the scale. We only claim that for some individuals, change on the scale is certainly an option worth exploring, and that results will vary from individual to individual. We want people to have the choice, and that's what gay rights activists are opposing. They want us to have no choice. For many religious minorities, change therapy is the only option to relieve suffering. Homosexuality and homosexual activity are so ego-dystonic that to engage in sexual relations with same sex would disturb the person's core sense of identity. Okay, there are 25% of my practice consists of Jewish men. I have some Muslims, and the rest are Christian men. They could never adopt a gay identity. It's too threatening to their values, to who they are as men and women. It would never work. Okay, so to conclude, you're not being told about the predictors of homosexuality. You're not being told the truth about the mental issues associated with homosexuality, the fluidity of sexual orientation, and finally, the safety of change therapies. And I'm going to hand the presentation over to my excellent colleague, David Pickup, who's going to talk more about that.
Thank you, Bob. In this segment, before we go to Q&A, I'm here to talk about the change therapy that we practice. I'm talking about several clinicians, actually, but specifically today, I'm going to tell you a bit about what authentic reparative therapy really is. Not little r, big R. There's a difference, and you're going to see it. However, I feel compelled to interrupt for just a few moments and tell you about a new development that we've just learned about last week. We just learned last Thursday night that the unite sex with men. Some of you who are listening in, some of you right now, you can go to your iPhones or computers if they're up, and you can see this report right now, a report actually on the report, on c-fam.org. That's c-fam.org. The UN Family Planning Agency, UNFPA, has published a stunning rights statement that is signaling the beginning and future path toward the acceptance of pedophilia. They do this subtly by just happening to include the age range of sexual experience with men who have sex with men to include boys by definition as young as 10 years of age, even though they never actually call it pedophilia. This agency also calls for the legalization of prostitution, by the way, the use of drugs to help men cope with the stigmatization of being gay, and advises, quote, safe ways to have sex. And they include 10 to 17-year-old boys in the community of men who have sex with men. This is a strong signal toward a community made up of this group that they have rights to sexual freedom. You need to know this. Those of you listening around the world, you in this audience need to know this. This is what part of the United Nations is beginning to slowly begin to perpetrate towards something that I think you probably have some strong emotions about right now. There's your announcement. Look for this. Be a part of the movement to speak out against this. And we may speak more later on this in the day. To continue, authentic reparative therapy recognizes that homosexual feelings arise out of detachment to important primary relationships and one's gender security. I think enough has been said about that already. Shame, I'm not talking about guilt, we're talking about shame, the kind of shame that thinks, I'm not a real man, I don't feel like a man, I'm worthless, unforgivable. If you're a person of faith, that's not even scriptural. That kind of soul-stopping shame is what must be resolved and is the first priority of our clients in our offices, which many gay people, honest people who are interested in the truth, don't even know. But that's why we're here to tell you what the American public, what the APAs, and many other people simply don't know and are keeping from you. Authentic reparative therapy gets rid of any and all shame for having homosexual feelings because that's what sets a person up for true and lasting change. Through grief work and emotional need fulfillment, homosexual feelings spontaneously lessen or dissipate. I'm making a very long story short in some men's lives. However, that's one of the ways that you can know between the junk out there and authentic reparative therapy. When the grief work is done on all these shame-based things, the lack of affirmation, approval, and affection during the gender identity years, when it's first formed, when those issues are felt and dealt with automatically in time, homosexual feelings tend to at least lessen, if not dissipate entirely in some cases. Reparative therapy, big R and T, reparative therapy, uses time-tested, sound psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral methods that work. And we have testimonials about that you're going to hear in a few moments. So, some of you may ask, well, what happens? I get this question all the time. What happens if reparative therapy is so wonderful, what actually happens in session? So I'm going to spend just a few minutes. I'm going to probably rip through this a bit in a fast way because a lot of it may be, in a sense, these issues are simple, but yet they can also get really complicated. So I'm going to rip through the next slides because it's reflective already of what has already been said. But this is both what the problem is and how reparative therapy, where are the moments of actual change. So, a boy is born, he has a presumably growing healthy male identity, as he's designed to have, but something happens. And there's a lot of things that can happen. There's more than what I've put on the screen, but there's a lot of things that happen to shame a person in their gender identity from very early ages, and a lot of unmet needs. And this is some of them. For whatever reason, and by the way, we're not interested in blaming, we're interested in naming whatever the truth is. We're not here to castigate or judge anyone, but neither can we deny what our clients are telling us in every case. There's a distinct loss of father and the 3 A's, which are affirmation, approval, and affection. Without affirmation, approval, another name for unconditional love, by the way, and affection, boys have problems moving along their journey into manhood. They develop a shamed male self. They, later on in life, experience some of the classic bullying you have heard about, no doubt. It's all over the internet. Boys feel it's abuse enough to be hit by some bullies, but the real abuse comes internally, and they develop this kind of shame I've been talking about. Some of them feel extremely emotionally abandoned. And you might imagine, as I put there on the screen, this results in a lot of pain for a very young child. No child that young, in my opinion, can handle this unless they have an emotionally corrective experience, which most of our clients really don't. That's why they're in this predicament. A lot of pain and anger and grief is being repressed, and in some cases suppressed. Repressed means you're doing it without realizing it. Suppressed means I am shoving those things down consciously. So this is what happens to a little boy, somewhere between the ranges of 2, 5, 6, 7, right in there. So he can't handle these things. I don't know many boys who can when he has this much against them. So he begins to develop defense mechanisms. You've heard defensive detachment. This is where this kicks in. As the saying goes, if a boy detaches from his father, he detaches from maleness and his self. This is what happens in the early minds and hearts of little boys. And then on top of that, maybe, as I said before, shame-based statements. There's the defensive detachment. In a sense, if he's detached from maleness, he will experience automatically, unconsciously, a sense of disowned parts of his body. We have a lot of clients who come in and they're just not in their bodies. They're not alive. They're not in what we call the authentic or the assertive state. And they don't feel good about themselves at all. And they seem to be, here's the key word, trapped because of these emotional issues. And then finally, because these things are just too painful, on top of this will occur what we call a false self. It's not a hypocritical self. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about a kind of compensatory false self that keeps them away from a lot of anguish. All right, so after this, at some point in a guy's life, and by the way, our clients, generally speaking, although we have outside of those ranges, somewhere between, in the main, 15 and 32, who come in with even though different manifestations of these issues, they all have the basic principles. So there's kind of a happy, resulting, same-sex attracted, everything's fine kind of self. So, but their lives aren't working. They still feel depressed or discouraged. They know they weren't born this way, but they can't figure it out. So in comes Mr. Therapist, that's me, and I move in towards the client. So if I'm coming from, I won't explain the details of this, but if I'm coming from a psychodynamic approach, which means I search with the client, with his viewpoint, going according to his belief system, not mine, his belief system, his wants for therapy, what he wants to do, not forced by me or Robert at all. We find out together in a trusted, compassionate relationship how these things came to be. And to make a long story short, when a guy faces these issues and heals what's underneath the homosexual feelings, which the body never lies, it always automatically comes up. Beneath the homosexual feelings, there are all those issues I explained a few moments ago. We move into those things, and those things, one by one, or sometimes in little pieces all at once, begin to go away, and go away, and go away, and go away. And finally, what's left over are the original hurts and wounds of a little boy. And you know what happens? You know what happens in this way? A boy grieves a loss, he expresses it, and he finally comes up. He takes a breath, and he realizes he's been trapped by shame. It's now relieved, and he feels more authentic in his own body. He realizes how good it feels to be a boy, how good it feels to be a man. And then when we go back sometimes to the person or the picture that in his mind that someone he's been sexually attracted to, there it is. The sexual attraction has at least lessened or dissipated entirely. That tells us two things. There is no gay gene, and change is possible. That's a microcosm of the kind of work that Robert and I are privileged and honored and humbled to do in our offices, because these emotionally changing, not behavioral change only, emotional change in sexuality happen in our offices every day of the week, almost. And sometimes I sit there and I almost weep. In fact, sometimes I have, because I know what these guys are going through. The reason why I know, folks, is because I was one of those sexually abused little boys at 5 years of age. A lot of other issues that contributed to my feelings as well in puberty. However, I was a classic child of repression. I didn't contact a reparative therapist who knew what they were doing until many years later as an adult. Reparative therapy helped save my life. I don't know what I would have done or where I would have gone if I had not had a trusted and, yes, loving, compassionate therapist who understood exactly what I was going through. And through those and some other outside experiences with healthy, intimate relationships with men, my attractions have dissipated. I could tell you more about that. You might want to catch me on the side if you want to, but I'm not, especially because I did away with all the shame, this was my story as well. I don't have homosexual feelings anymore because I did the hard work. I took my faith in hand, and I realized what was going on, and I said yes to the work. The work is hard, but it does work, and I'm living proof. And so are a lot of other people today. Some have had different experiences you'll hear today. Some have had faith-based only experiences that are inspiring. Some have had therapeutic experiences which are inspiring as well. And the last thing I want to leave with you is you're going to be handed out in just a few moments. If I can get those people who are going to hand out a story of change, you can do it now. You're going to each get a one-page document that tells a true story of therapeutic change, similar to my own, but it's not me. You need to go to voices-of-change.org. That's voices-of-change.org. There are over 100 stories of authentic therapeutic change on this website. I edited them, but it's minor grammatical editing and unnecessary parts. The beauty of these stories is you're going to have your heart ripped out. You're going to be stunned because of all the pain and anguish, and then comforted because every single one of these men and women experienced real and lasting change. And their stories are all written, every word, by themselves. We have to keep confidentiality, so their whole names aren't there, but the stories are there. This is what judges, gay activists, the APAs, even some churches just don't know. Look at the hearts of these men and women. You'll see change, and they're simply marvelous. Thank you for listening.
All these devices. Yeah, here's another one. David, that was fabulous, both of you. Thank you so much. And Robert, we have a lot of great questions. I just want to say that it just, to me, makes it that much more tragic that we're moving in the direction of making this illegal. To counsel anyone who wants help. It's just stunning to me. But we're not going to focus on that in this minute. I have some great questions, and we don't have much time. So I'm going to use it to you guys' discretion. I know it's to try to keep your answers a little measured, because otherwise we're going to run out of time, but not to the expense of giving good answers. So let me do one that's a little bit simpler, maybe, with the answer. How is the success rate working with your children with gender disorders? So let's go with Robert first.
So the success. Testing. Okay. The question is, again, please?
The success rate in working with children with gender disorders. What is the success rate of helping them and helping them align with their natural
Sure.
birth?
When we have parents who are committed to the process, it's excellent. I would say 100%. If the parents and the child remain in therapy and follow our instructions, then there's success. If they don't and they're not committed, of course, then it's zero. And that's what's important, is that when I'm a family therapist, and when I do that therapy, I insist that both mom and dad come to the session.
Let me say a word about that. As we alluded to already, when children come in, and let's say they're gay identified, and their parents want us to fix them, you know what we tell them? That's unethical. We don't force anyone into change. When they come in, and if they do the work, things happen. When they don't do the work, for various reasons, again, we're not about blaming. Some clients are very resistant. Some clients are there and it can get complicated. But if you do the work, change can happen.
Okay, next question. Either of you, have you ever counseled someone who did not have serious childhood trauma or abuse issues, including family dysfunction? Someone who looked like, maybe, in all intents and purposes, was born gay. No reason.
Never. I've been doing this for 11 years, and every man that I have counseled, or every boy, there have been problems in the family, problems in relationships. It's just amazing. I had one client who I thought had a good relationship with his dad, and then I found out after he began to talk in therapy that it was a good relationship because he did what his dad wanted. In other words, he was involved in basketball and football and sports and fishing. He didn't like any of it. Okay? So David hinted at this, that's the false self. He became the way his father needed him to be, but that's not the true person. So the answer is I've never seen anything but dysfunction.
Okay, let me restate the question. David, have you ever counseled a child who had none of the things that you described, none of the things that Robert lined out about the causes that seem to be sending children in this direction? Anyone who didn't have any of that but ended up being homosexual?
I thought I had one case last year. He's still with me, by the way. And some people find this unusual, but he's a gay client. I have gay clients. I don't force them to change, especially if they believe they were born that way or they just don't want to change or whatever. Interesting thing happened. I thought, I pride myself on trying my best to have an open mind. So even though I do have very conservative principles and I'm pretty well set on my belief systems, I listened to him. Last year I thought, okay, maybe this is the one exception. Let me take a look about this. Well, about 3 months later, all the issues began to come out that we've been talking about today. So the answer is no, I never do, in my opinion. But an interesting thing about this guy, we have a good, solid, compassionate relationship. He knows what I do. He doesn't want to change, but he's open-hearted. And so an interesting thing happened to me the other day. He comes in a little bit miffed into session, it's been several months ago, and he goes, I'm kind of miffed. And I said, why? Well, because I was attracted to a girl the other day. Blast it. We didn't do any reparative therapy. He had just had therapy for the self-esteem of his confidence as a young man, which he wanted to do in therapy. And that kind of tells you an idea of what's going on. But no, even though some people come from good Christian homes, and let's face it, if you're really a Christian, you're going to come most likely from a good home. But sometimes those things are very subtle, and they have much more to do with what Robert is saying, where it's very subtle and goes under the radar. So we have a lot of cases like that.
Okay, we've got some great questions here. So next one. You guys said, David, you especially, said that it's hard work. It's hard work to unring that bell, or bells. Can you further describe this hard work and the client's feelings during this hard work? Either of you.
I have a guy in therapy with me right now. This poor man was abused not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, not for a year, but for years. And the hard work is going back and feeling what it was like for him as a helpless, innocent 7, 8, 9-year-old to be forced into this activity that he didn't want, and then later on in life, in adolescence, to have feelings that he liked it. Often, people believe that a victim of sexual abuse who enjoyed the abuse was not abused. Nothing could be further from the truth. Okay? These young men never wanted to engage in this activity. And so the hard work is sorting through all those events, all those feelings, and trying to reach the other side. That's the hard work.
David, anything to add?
And here's an example of what happens by it's not copycatted. It's not everyone's experience is not exactly the same. But here's an example of what often happens to me. It happened just the other week as a result of the hard work that we've been talking about today, which takes tremendous courage and a willingness to go deeply and resolve those root issues. Sometimes a man will look up to me. I haven't asked him, it's unsolicited. I have not asked them the question if they feel a certain way or not. But they look up at me, sometimes with tears in their eyes, and get this. They said, last week for instance, they say, David, this whole manhood, get affirmation and approval and affection, this feels so good. This feels a lot better than having orgies with men. That's a sign, folks, of change. Spiritual change and emotional change. That's what you need to know that you're not being told.
All right, I just don't know what the time is, so wherever the timers are, it would be nice to have a little cue on that. Here's another question. The left has had 20 years of condemnation of the Catholic Church for priests and their conduct of pedophilia, but now the UN is supporting pedophilia with boys starting at age 10. Why? Why would the UN be doing this? Could I just add that, I debated this on CNN 100 years ago when the Surgeon General, Jocelyn Elders, wrote that forward to a book called Harmful to Minors, and they were trying to lower the age of sexual consent to 12 then. This is not new. This is not new, but why are they doing this?
I believe that they're doing this. I believe that they're doing this because this really isn't about protecting children. It's not about discrimination of gays and lesbians and anything else. This is not about this. Folks, this movement, in my opinion, is only about one thing: the complete normalization of homosexuality and transgenderism in every society on the planet. That's it. You're going to have a lot of heart-rending stories on the surface, some of them worth paying attention to, but that's what's going on. You have people in high places now who are, in some cases, not all, some cases, having these attractions themselves. And so they want to change the world. And so they're moving the world towards pansexualism, which is pretty much just the philosophy of sex is wonderful, let's all have it together whenever and with whomever we want it. And my question is, are we really going to let this happen again? Are we going to have to go all the way back to ancient Rome, where powerful and destructive men actually perpetrated relationships on little boys and called it man love? Are you prepared to do that? If you're not, then join our team and we'll explain what that means later on.
Let me interject also that the more modern story is that this is an effort of the left, sexual anarchy. And Dr. Paul Kinger of Grove City College has just written a new book about this, exploring the link between the, I don't know what to call them, the anarchists, the communists, the radical socialists, and, that goes back to the Weather Underground. This is recent history. In the 60s, smash monogamy, that there should not be sex between just two people. It should be done in a group always. So there is a link between the teachings of communism, we'll go back that far, and just sexual anarchy. Go figure. But they're trying to destroy the family, so that's another factor added in. All right. Someone wants to know, and I know you guys know all the answers on this, but who is financing the radical homosexual agenda? Where is the money coming from?
I would just venture to say that it's coming from the left. The liberals don't want boundaries. Okay, in life we have to have boundaries. We have to have boundaries around our personal behavior, our sexual behavior, and I think that there are a lot of individuals in the United States who are liberal-leaning who don't want to maintain the boundaries that we have, and I think that's where the money's coming from, especially the Democratic Party. I don't mean to get political here, but that's where it seems to be coming from.
Here's what you may not know. This year, and I think over the next 2-3 years, Equality California, which is one of the main players in all of these issues, Equality California, and by the way, did you know they're in every state now of the union? They're Equality Louisiana, Equality Texas, and so on. This is what's happening. And they have been given raised $500 million to go around the country and to affect legislatures, affect school systems, talk to churches even, to push the world in these directions that we're talking about today. And it's, in my opinion, I don't know exact names, but they are coming from Equality California, but they're getting their funds from very wealthy, what I would call liberal donors. That's at least where part of it's coming from.
There's also the issue of corporate America, which, starting with the United Airlines, as I recall, in the Northwest, was the first major airlines to cave on this issue. And it was sort of, I think, started out, and this is in my words, as sort of an extortion process. So they caved, and then it became one before we lined up in terms of the polls and the propaganda had gotten to the level where it is now. Corporations were afraid not to give big money, and they did. and they still do. And now we've come into full acceptance in culture, and the Supreme Court's made their ruling, and now it's just, they're afraid not to give, and they're afraid to give to any conservative causes. That's why people who work in this industry are just desperate for funds. There just is nothing, because corporate America will not go on record as helping a reparative therapist or an ex-gay organization or a family group like American Family Association. They will not do that. And how we got to that point would require another panel discussion.
Can I just make one comment?
Sure.
David and I both belong to the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and that association will not let us advertise. They said, we don't like the therapy you do, we think it's harmful, which is not true. You may not advertise in any of our publications. You may not present at any conferences, okay? We are being marginalized and oppressed for what we believe. So it's a very serious situation right now, ladies and gentlemen.
This is a really great question, and I think we're just about out of money. So money. Speaking of money, I mean time. In the development of sex and orientation are girls. What do you see differently?
I work primarily with men, so I am not claiming to work expertly as some other therapists might do with lesbians. We usually, the lesbians that come and see us who know that change is possible and they want this, they usually see a woman therapist, and there's a reason for that. There's so much sexual abuse going on that in women's cases, I would venture to say is pretty accurate that the violent nature of sexual abuse on women or as little girls is much more prevalent than for little boys. And so sometimes a male therapist will be frankly just result in too much cognitive dissonance, or it'll be too rough for them to have a male therapist. So that's one reason why we don't focus that much on lesbianism. However, I do have one teenage client, and we're doing really well. So it's a long story, but a little bit of insight might be that there are some similarities. A lesbian will have issues with feelings of insecurity or disattachment with mom. Kind of the same thing with boys and their fathers. But there's usually a lot more evidence of sexual abuse. And with women, it tends to be, I'm just speaking generally, I'm not speaking specifically at all. There's different cases. Generally, sexuality tends to be a little bit more fluid even with women. So, and because of the violent nature of a lot of sexual abuse, it's more about that in my experience. But some of the same things are in fact, a bit similar. We just have to be sure that we're giving the clients not a cookie-cutter therapy, but something through great efforts to find their truth with our great compassion so they can achieve what they really want to be and who they believe they actually are. All these people who come to us, they believe fundamentally they were not born this way, and they are accessing their authentic, true selves.
Let me remind you that later on today we'll be hearing from former lesbians and former gay men who will have their story to tell. And this will be quick because this is a really good question. In some states it's now illegal, like New Jersey, California, Oregon, to Washington, D.C. That's my turf in Illinois. Now illegal to counsel kids to become straight. But is it illegal anywhere to counsel kids to become homosexual?
No. If a child comes in and says, I want to be gay, I think I'm gay, our professional associations tell us you should affirm that. You should help them explore that. You should help them see if that's the truth. David and I are in a real predicament because in the state of California, if we have someone come and say, look, I was sexually abused, now I have same-sex attraction, how can you help me? We have to be extremely careful how we word the treatment plan. Because if it includes any words about changing orientation, addressing orientation, we're in hot water. And that's where we stand now, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? I can treat sexual abuse, but I cannot mention sexual orientation in the treatment plan for minors.
Let me just add just one little anecdote because it's relevant. How many of you have heard the name Chaplain Wes Motter? Chaplain Motter was the chaplain to SEAL Team 6. He is the man who delivered the news to Tyrone Wood's family that their son had been killed on the annex of Benghazi. And that chaplain, Wes Motter, was in a private counseling session counseling someone who was confused about their homosexuality. And he nearly got drummed out of the service after 20 years of service and a fabulous record. If it hadn't been for the intercession of some people in Washington, D.C., I count myself on the list, FRC, AFA, he would be gone. So this is how serious it's getting. Well, listen, gentlemen, this is great. Robert Vazzo and David Pickup, thank you so much. Great questions, too, by the way.